So, linear momentum, the only way to hit a forehand. A few years later, I'm watching the US Open, and a lot of the clay court players from Europe are starting to hit with the open stance. Now, a lot of people hit it with open stance on the clay courts because of the sliding, but they were taking it to the hard courts. I noticed it was working very well for them, and even the commentators were arguing about it, whether this was correct technique. I thought it was, so I wrote another tip, and I titled it, "The Forehand is an open and closed case. Both shots should work well." Using angular momentum creates about as much power as linear momentum when done correctly. It's been a no-brainer that using angular momentum and open stance, you get a quicker recovery back to the center, and therefore the players are getting much better coverage on the court. I started teaching the open stance to all my students. They loved it. They brought it back home with them, and unfortunately the pros that they went back to wouldn't let them use it. So my tip, the open and closed case, it wasn't the case. The jury was still out, obviously. Pros argued about it for years. Finally, Tennis Magazine wrote 2 articles apologizing to the public for their instruction that only linear momentum was correct for the forehand. The open stance became so popular that now over 80% of all forehands on the pro circuit are hit with an open stance. Vic Braden wrote an article, very interesting article, disputing the myth that stepping into a tennis ball was the only way. He talked about angular momentum and how much power and racket head speed was created when done correctly. The open stance was now accepted throughout the world. When using angular momentum correctly, and a lot of people don't use the open stance correctly, they are just open to the target and using all arm. But when used correctly, the racket head speed can actually be greater than with linear momentum. And of course, much easier recovery back to the center. So finally, I was vindicated. The jury is in. The forehand, it is an open and closed case.